Again, you are joining in for our breakout session from the HandiHam radio operator. Which is staying connected. All right, guys. So I want to welcome everyone again. Miss Lucinda Moody is the coordinator for the HandiHam Program at Courage Kinney Rehabilitation Institute, based in Golden Valley, Minnesota. She holds an extra class amateur radio license and has been involved with the HandiHam Program at various levels since 2005. She has experience running radio communication teams for the Salvation Army in both emergency and community events. She holds a master's in social work and also enjoys playing the piano when she is not talking on the radio. Miss Moody, thank you so much for being here today. I am thrilled to have you, and I cannot wait to learn about what you have to tell us today. Go ahead, Miss Lucinda.
Thanks so much for having me, and it's great to be here. I love sharing about amateur radio. It's really interesting that when the HandiHam program started 53 years ago, which is hard to believe, programs just don't last that long these days. But 53 years ago, the program began, and they never dreamed that they would primarily be serving people who are blind. While we take people into our program with any sort of disability, right now, at last check, 77% of our members are blind or visually impaired. So the ham radio hobby is really good, a good fit. We have right now about 600 members, and those members are located all over the world. I think that's also sometimes a surprise to people that we have members currently in 30 countries. We have 48 out of the 50 states right now too. So we actually did discover we've got 2 right now that don't have anybody. So I guess we got to get recruiting. So it's interesting. We ended up in a pandemic in 2020, and amateur radio, which had never gone away, started getting even more popular. As cell phones became a thing, I began to notice in the 2000s that there was less activity on the ham bands. They never went dead, and there was a combination of things. I think people got a little more distracted. There were other things they could do, and there just wasn't as many people talking on the air. And the pandemic came along, and suddenly people didn't have all their other distractions, and ham radio exploded again. So we've ended up with a lot of new members over the last year with the pandemic. As a way of adapting to the pandemic, we used to do our services a little different in that we have actually licensed class materials available on cartridge, just because of a publishing agreement. We're kind of limited because of copyright. We can't put those things on the website because these are the same materials that are available for purchase. And obviously we don't want to mess things up for the people who do put the money into that. We're just thankful that they allow us to use this material for all of our members with print disabilities, but that's why it's only available in DAISY format on cartridge. And it used to be that we would run radio camp in person every year. Suddenly pandemic comes, it's not safe to run radio camp. So we swapped up how we teach things and started instituting these Zoom meetings, because Zoom is actually a fairly blind accessible platform. They've done a pretty good job of giving keyboard shortcuts and really making this work for people. So we started last summer with our first Get on the Air class. This is for people who already have a ham radio license. And that was our first foray. We did a week-long class. People loved it. And then this fall, we did our first Morse code class. By the way, if you get scared hearing the term Morse code is no longer required. It's just a lot of people like learning it now because they want to know it, but you don't have to have it for a license. So I keep talking about a license. Unlike CB radio, which is a lot of people have heard of, ham radio or amateur radio requires a license from the FCC. In the US, we have 3 license levels. So there's a technician that gets you certain privileges in the VHF and UHF bands and a few HF privileges. And then there's general class, which gets you a whole lot of HF privileges, and extra class, which gets you all the bands that are available to the ham radio service. You have to take an FCC exam for each of those. Those exams are run by volunteer examiner teams. And again, change of times with the pandemic, we now have the ability to actually get virtual exams where there are groups that are offering exams to people in their home. You actually get a reader and can complete your exam without having to go worry about trying to get to an in-person testing session or the potential risks. And in a lot of places, they really just aren't allowing in-person testing sessions. So another one of those things that's kind of changed. The first 2 tests, technician and general, are 35 question test. Extra class exam is a 50 question exam that gets progressively more complicated. But we do have licensed class study materials that are available that you can use in your digital talking book player, and that's available to members of the HandiHam program. Membership is really easy in the HandiHam program as far as if you decide that's something you want to do. You can email us at HandiHam, HandiHam @Allina, and that's ALLINA.com. And just let us know that you're interested in becoming a member. And a wonderful young lady named Pemdi will respond to you and get you all the information, and then you can decide for sure if that's what you want to do. We keep our membership rather affordable at $15 a year or $150 for a lifetime membership, simply because we don't want the cost of membership in the program to be a deterrent for people. If you decide you want to get into amateur radio, just a little bit of a nudge here, because the FCC has just recently, in the last couple of weeks, decided that they're going to add another $35 fee to the cost of an amateur radio license. So last I checked, and they may have issued it since I looked last this week, they haven't issued their report and order. Once they do, you'll have 30 days before that fee is implemented. So if you want to save some money, you kind of want to get in now and hurry up, because there will be a little more fee structure going on. And at that point, then anytime you would upgrade your license, you would have to pay again the $35 fee. And right now, if you also wanted to do any sort of call sign change, which we'll talk about in a minute, you would be assessed a fee, and you renew your license. Licenses in the amateur radio service are good for 10 years. So anytime you renewed your license, you would also be assessed the $35 fee right now. Now, over the years of the amateur radio service, which dates back to early 1900s, at times there have been fees for licenses, and at times there have not. So just because there's a $35 fee now doesn't mean there will always be. It'll be interesting to see how things change over the years, and whether we go back to not having fees or higher fees, lower fees. We just don't know, because actually the original proposal by the FCC was a $50 fee, and we were able to talk them down a little bit. So in amateur radio, unlike in CB radio, you'll often hear people talk about their handle. Well, in amateur radio, we have a call sign, and it is issued by the FCC. You can just take a sequential call sign when you pass your test, and they will issue that. Or there's the possibility of getting a vanity call sign, which once these fees are put in place, will also cost $35 for the application. A vanity call sign allows you to choose from available call signs and apply for it and see if you get it. People wonder, why do you want a vanity call sign? Well, there's different reasons. We have one young lady in the program that wanted her grandfather's call sign. He had passed away, and that was pretty special to her to be able to get her grandfather's call sign. And through the program, she was able to get, through the vanity call sign program, she was able to get that. Some people want the initials of their name or various things. I know some people with guide dogs want a call sign that begins with K9. So there's different reasons that people like to use those. One reason that people who get into amateur radio contesting or people who get into operating with Morse code want it is because certain call signs are shorter and faster and can allow you to make more contacts more quickly. Amateur radio offers just an unlimited number of things. So you may know an amateur radio operator and all they do is contesting. And you're like, oh, I don't want to contest. I guess I don't want that hobby. Well, no. Contesting is just one of a lot of things you can do. Now, if you get the bug, contesting can be fun. And it's also, while I've never been an avid contester, when I put up a new antenna, I know that the fastest way I can really check out my new antenna is to just dabble around in a contest, because you can make a lot of contacts in a lot of areas in a short amount of time and really get an idea how things are working. So even if you aren't really into contesting, it's a good skill to have just when you're checking out new equipment. A lot of people get into amateur radio and like to work in emergency communications. And a lot of blind people run nets for emergency communications teams because you don't have to be sighted to run radio nets. What does help is if you've got a brailler or some sort of way of taking notes as you're going along, that you can actually go back and read. A refreshable braille display, we have a lot of people who use those. That's easier than using a computer and having JAWS speak back at you while people are also talking at you on the radio. That can be a little tough to try to keep everything straight if that's how you choose to do it. But there are a lot of blind people who do serve on emergency communications teams. Another thing that people like to do in amateur radio is see how many states or how many countries, or some people get how many counties. Some people are trying to get every county in the US. And they like to work towards these awards for worked all states, worked all counties. DX in amateur radio is a term for distant station. And so there's the DXCC or DX Century Club. And if you get 100 different countries, you can turn that in for that DXCC award. So there's different things that people like to chase in that. Some people just like to get on the air and talk. We call it rag chewing in amateur radio, where you have people that you just meet up oftentimes with a sched or a schedule. Where you may have this group that you get together every Monday morning on whatever frequency it is that you're on, and you just talk. And you might have another sched with some other group on Thursdays. There are also various groups that meet that have other interests and meet in the amateur radio bands. We have members of our program that are in groups that are into cooking and knitting, and we have some that are into remote control vehicles. Interestingly enough, we actually have some of our blind members who have gotten into using remote control vehicles, some of which use controllers that require an amateur radio, a technician class amateur radio license to be able to operate. So there's just a lot of different areas. If you get into emergency communications, which is something I did early on, I joined the Salvation Army team, emergency communications team there, and actually ended up running it for a number of years in Grand Rapids, Michigan before I moved to Minnesota. We did everything from running parking lot communications for Christmas toy giveaways. We ran communications for, sadly, funerals for police officers locally. communications for local emergencies. We had a flood, a couple different years we had floods that we were running communications for the Salvation Army teams that were serving food, and we were running all their communications. Tornadoes, let's see, what else do we run? There were a number of various emergencies. We actually had one time the Kent County Jail there in Michigan had a crane collapse, and we came in and ran communications during that time because it actually collapsed and landed on their building. So if you're into serving your community, ham radio is a great way to do it, where ham radio operators also do things like give reports and also take reports during hurricanes. We have a hurricane watch net that's activated during every major storm, and people in the area give reports, and people out of the area where they're safe take reports. And then that stuff is compiled and given to proper authorities so that you have more data to be able to be used. So the HandiHam program actually was started clear back in 1967 by a man named Ned Carman. He was cited. I don't think he ever dreamed, again, where the program would go as far as serving people who are blind. He was a biller for Mayo Clinic, and he noticed that back then, oftentimes the people who couldn't pay their bills were people with disabilities. And back then they didn't have things like transportation programs and various things. So these people were basically stuck in their homes. And he looked at that and said, have I got a hobby for you? He was a ham radio operator. And so with the sisters from St. Francis of Assisi, including a lady who again has passed, Sister Alverna, they got the HandiHam program off the ground in Rochester, Minnesota. But what they didn't realize was there was a lot of people wanting something like this. And the program grew so rapidly, they realized they couldn't handle the infrastructure. Initially, they thought it was going to be something local, and next thing they knew, they had multiple states involved, and then they had people from other countries wanting to get involved. And so Courage Center here in Golden Valley, Minnesota, became involved way back around 1970. And the HandiHam program became a full-fledged system in Courage Center, and it just kept growing. They started in the 70s holding in-person events here in Minnesota, and people would fly in from all over the country. People would drive in from other states and spend a week doing in-depth hands-on amateur radio. For many years, they held camps in both Minnesota and California. And then in 2013, Courage Center merged with Sister Kenny Rehabilitation Institute to become Courage Kenny Rehabilitation Institute, and which is under a big healthcare system called Allina Health. That's where our email address has allina.com in it. And so it's interesting. We actually have a ham radio program that runs under a big healthcare organization. I started running the program. It's interesting. I'd volunteered for the program for many years. I actually started as a member of the program and then volunteered. And in 2017, I started running the program. The program had kind of been in limbo for the last 2 years because the previous director had retired in 2015. They thought the program was moving, and then it turned out it wasn't. And so now we're back and just growing it bigger and better than ever. This year we'll be adding virtual license classes. That'll be starting later this year. We're doing an intermediate Get on the Air class coming up in February, and then in March we start our intermediate level Morse code class. These are all Zoom based. We have Zoom based get-togethers nearly monthly now, and we do them on Zoom because that way students who don't yet have a call sign can get involved. We also have ways of for people who don't live in a location where they can put up outside antennas and have big radio stations. There are ways to get on the air using voice over internet protocol. So things like Echolink, you do have to have a call sign to be able to use that. But people oftentimes get into we have daily HandiHam nets that run 11 o'clock Central Time. And a lot of people connect via Echolink, and they're able to talk to people on a regular basis that way, and do it as long as you've got a computer with a microphone or a smartphone with the Echolink app, and you've got your license processed with Echolink, because they will verify your radio license. Then you can get on that way. We do have some remote stations available through the HandiHam program. Unfortunately, they are not fully blind accessible, and that's a problem that we are still working on addressing, coming up with a remote station option where it can be fully blind accessible. We currently have about 270 life members, and the rest are our annual members. We publish HandiHam World, which is a weekly e-letter and podcast. Comes out usually about 45 times a year. We do have a few weeks that end up off for holidays and vacations, etc. That e-letter keeps people up to date on website content. We have a large members only section of the website. That's actually the majority of the website. There are some things available on the front end of the website, but most of it is in the members only section. We do articles on news and assistive technology. And while, again, we do serve people with all kinds of disabilities, a lot of our stuff it pertains to people who are blind, simply because that's a large percentage of the population we serve. And then articles on news and amateur radio, interviews with current HandiHam members. We have members that submit articles, just all kinds of things like that. HandiHam World is available to everybody. You don't have to be a member. You can subscribe to that, whether or not you choose to become a member. We run camps and conferences. Now, we're not going to be doing that again in 2021 as far as camp, just because of the pandemic. Depending on the rollout of the vaccine, we may run a conference this fall here in the Twin Cities. That would be a hands-on event in person. But we also have added a lot of virtual classes. So there's a lot of options to do things without having to do any travel and have the expense of that. We also have an equipment connection program. So for people who have gotten their license and want to get radio equipment, but don't have the money to purchase that, we take equipment that's been donated by people and route it to people who are in need of that equipment. Right now, Kenwood is the manufacturer that offers the most accessibility on their radios. So anytime I get a Kenwood radio donated, we try to get a speech synthesizer added, because that's actually a separate little board that gets added to most of their radios. And then get that rerouted out to blind members so that we can get more people on the air. That equipment connection program is available to members of the HandiHam program. We also are always looking for volunteers, and don't think that being blind or disabled keeps you from being a volunteer in the HandiHam program, because right now, actually the majority of our volunteers on our volunteer instructor team are actually blind. So we're always looking for volunteers in various areas, and you don't have to be in Minnesota to volunteer for our program. That's also another thing where we have volunteers actually from multiple countries. And of course, we always accept donations of money and used equipment for the equipment connection program. And while we don't require it, we do ask people, if you get money from, or if you get equipment, not money, if you get equipment from the equipment connection program, try to make sure that when you're done with it, pass it along either to someone else that you know who is disabled or blind, particularly if it's blind accessible equipment. We really like you to keep that with people who are blind. And if you don't know who to pass it along to, get it back to us and we'll pass it along to somebody else, so we make sure that we can keep more people on the air.